Hello everybody, welcome to this new set of notes. As we are continuing to make our way through Module 4, we're going to start with some vocab for this module, and we're going to start with some vocab for this standard. We were in 8.EE.B that dealt with solving equations, solving inequalities, and determining what type of solution an equation had. And here we're going to be moving into 8.EE.B. Alright, so that gets into graphing equations and looking at the relationship between two variables, both the x variable and the y variable, something we've talked about before, which would have been proportional relationships from last year. So we're going to start by taking some notes and getting that vocab into our notebook. Alright, so on page 19 in your notebook. Alright, today's date is 11/16/2020. And we are still in Module 4. Go ahead and draw this line here across the top. Okay. And so our title is just essentially going to be the standard vocab. All right, so it's going to be 8.EE.B vocab. And really, we need to make sure it just really stays with this standard, because a lot of it is kind of tied directly to making this happen. And we're going to use this vocab, and we're going to use the information we take it both in these notes and that we see through the rest of this module as we get into functions. All right, so we start here with just graphing equations, and then kind of look ahead at how that turns into graphing functions. So we're going to start with this. We're not going to have really an I can statement, because we're not really trying to answer anything other than, I guess, kind of how does this vocab help us. So we're just going to jump right into it. And like I said before, this vocab and the rest of this module, or at least this section of the module, is going to be focused on how we deal with proportional relationships. So that's going to be our first word that we put in here. Proportional relationships. Okay. And so when we have a proportional relationship, as we talked about last year in 7th grade, we're going to continue to be looking at them here in the 8th grade. And it's going to be a little bit more complex. And so really what we're looking to see is the change of something in terms of its variables. So a lot of times we have an x variable and we have a y variable. All right. If you think about this, when we graph them, we have the x-axis and we have the y-axis. As x changes, we look at how y changes. As the independent variable changes, we look at how the dependent variable changes. And so when we examine that, how one changes and what that causes the other to do, we look for a proportional relationship. A proportional relationship means that as x changes, y changes by the same amount. So if we increase something by 5, then we increase it the same amount, or the same amount moving forward for that other variable. So if we change x by a certain amount, y should also be changing by that certain amount, and that should happen continuously from one point to the next one. Okay? So the change by one variable by the same amount of change in the other variable. So in particular, we're talking about x's and y's. So the way we determined a proportional relationship was when we divided y by x. If we got the same thing, so whatever point of information we had, when we divided y by x, we needed to get the same value. And that would go for each and every data point. When we had that, then we would have what we would call a proportional relationship. And a lot of these equations that we are going to be faced with now are built on that proportional relationship. As x changes, how does y change? And looking for that same change moving forward. Okay? So There is also another name for that change. Okay? It goes by many, many, many names, but one of the names that we've used so far is unit rate. And unit rate is used specifically in this module. And that is essentially another word for your constant of proportionality. Okay? So we're going to put that on there as well. So it's your constant of proportionality. It is the amount that y changes when you change x. So for instance, okay, if we have the equation y equals 2x, okay, so that means if x is 1, so if we take 1 and plug it in for x, that means y is also then going to have to change by that, and it's going to be 2. So it's 1 times 2, so that means y would be equal to 2. And so we would write that, okay, as a change of 2 over 1. So our constant proportionality is 2, because our value of y is 2 and our value of x is 1. Okay, and so we have a 2 here and we would have a 2 here. Now, as we talked about last year, you can find this value by doing y equals kx. And so we had this y equals kx for a lot, and then we would, to be able to find our constant proportionality, we did y divided by x. All of those things we're still going to be using this year. The only difference being is now instead of a unit rate or a constant of proportionality, we refer to this value, this number, as the slope of a line. All right? We refer to this as the slope of our line. It is the same thing. It is y equals kx, but in this case, we move it to y equals mx. Okay? So k is our constant of proportionality, m is our slope. So the value doesn't change, the way we find the value doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the name and the letter representing it. Mathematically, nothing else is different from last year. Nothing else is different from here to here. The only difference being m is your slope value. So if we go back to looking at this equation here, we would y equals 2x. We would say that our slope is 2. Our constant proportionality is 2. Our unit rate is 2. It's the same thing that we're talking about. It's the same number in the same place for all the equations, but we have a different name for them now here in 8th grade, and we have to refer to it as the slope. Okay? So when we have slope, we can also refer to this as the rise over the run. Okay? So this refers to our y over x. Again, we find our slope doing the same thing. We take our y value, divide it by our x value. And we call it rise over run because we're looking at how it changes vertically and dividing that by how it changes horizontally. Okay? How it rises, goes up or down, and how it runs, going east and west. That's the same thing here. Your x value is your horizontal value, it's your horizontal axis, and your y value is your vertical value, your vertical axis. So, rise over run, if you ever hear that, if you ever see that, it's just essentially talking about your y over x value. Okay? So, here we have the y equals to the m. The m is your slope. Your constant proportionality is your slope. All of that stuff. It's not very different from last year. What is different is now the inclusion of a new piece of this. Okay? This is y equals mx plus b. It has a particular name, and this name is slope-intercept form. All right. We're going to see equations that are put into a couple of different types of forms. Okay, slope-intercept form, standard form, point-slope form, and all of these forms you can have the same equation look several different ways. Kind of like a rational number, how we can have a rational number as a decimal, we can have a rational number as a fraction, we can have it as an improper fraction, mixed number, whatever, as well as a ratio. All of those, we can all be talking about the same number, but represent it in different ways. And the forms of these equations are essentially the same thing, just looking at it with, in this case, equations to be graphed. So m is still your slope, okay? That's still your slope value, but in this case, your plus b, this refers to what's called the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is where, let's actually put that here, it's not technically a vocab word, but the y-intercept is the point at which a line crosses the y-axis. Okay? Point at which a line crosses the y-axis. And when we get into graphing, this will make way more sense. Okay, but for right now, we just kind of have getting all of this stuff kind of on paper so that we understand a little bit of what we're talking about here. And then finally, really the last piece that I want to have you put in here is linear equation. This vocab is incomplete. It is not everything that we need to know for this module. It is not everything that we need to know for this topic, but it is a good place to start and base our information off of and base where we go from here off of. Okay, so with linear equation, what we're talking about is an equation that creates a line when it is graphed. In particular on a coordinate plane. And we'll get into using coordinate planes more and more. We'll have some notes on how to graph things and how to put them onto a coordinate plane, just so that way we remember all of those things that we've used in the past, but now we're going to be using a little bit more frequently and a little bit more, not complicated, but complexly, with more complexity here in the 8th grade. All right, so I just want you to kind of have this as your basis to start, because when we jump into your book, okay, and I really want you to understand what we're doing here in lesson 10. When we jump into the book, we're talking about the constant. So here I'm on page 96 in your book, in this lesson summary. When it talks about this constant right here, okay, it has a y equals, or y over x. That's the same thing as your slope. That's the same thing as your constant proportionality. That's the same thing as your unit rate. All of that stuff, that's exactly what you're doing within this lesson, the beginning of lesson 10. You're taking your y value and you're dividing it by your x value. All right? So this is what I want you to start on and focus on. You will have an assignment posted tomorrow on Tuesday, so that way we can start seeing some of this in practice a little bit. We will have a meet tomorrow, so you'll see some of this in practice and be able to ask questions from that. But that is all the time that I have for you, and I will see you all very soon. Adios.